Welcome to Amazing Stories of Amazing Grace. I'm your host Chester Stanley, and we're delighted to have here in the studio Peter and Maree Watts. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Chester.
Great to have you with us, and welcome, Maree.
Thank you very much.
Very good. And we want to hear about your journey to faith. That's what this series is about. So look, we'll start, I think, with you, Peter, and I detect a bit of an accent there. Where are you from originally?
I was born in Birmingham, England.
Yes.
Lived for the first 26 years of my life there.
Right.
Didn't come to Australia until some time after that.
Okay. And Maree, you sound very Australian to me.
I am indeed, yes. I was actually born in Papua New Guinea, but I am Australian to Australian parents, yes.
Very good. And we'll come back later because obviously somewhere, you know, these two places are a long way apart. Obviously you met, so we'll keep that exciting bit till later. So Peter, tell us a little bit about your background. If I remember correctly, you shared with me that you weren't brought up as a believer, as a Christian?
That's right. I was raised in a fairly secular home, I guess.
Yes.
A typical English home. I have a brother, my mum and dad, lived in Birmingham, lived there for all of my life before moving to Australia. And typically I went to state school, wasn't interested in religion at all really. I guess I couldn't say there was no God, but I didn't know if there was a God or not, and I didn't really care.
Right.
And I guess football was a big passion in my life in England, as it is for many
very
people.
English thing to be.
Very English thing to be.
Yes.
And yeah, just I suppose had a normal secular upbringing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and from there you met somebody in a job that you had?
Yeah, I started out life as a car mechanic, but shortly thereafter I began working in a restaurant, and I began working as a cocktail bartender in a restaurant. And a fellow, I guess I'd been working there about a year, and a guy came to work at the bar.
Yes.
And one day he spoke to me about God, which was very bizarre given that we were working in a cocktail bartender.
Absolutely, yes. Okay, keep going with the story. So you meet this fellow, and
we were working. You know, the restaurant was a large 450-seat restaurant, and it had a large square bar. It was an American restaurant, but it was in England, and it had a large square bar at the front. But in the back of house, in the kitchen, there would be a service bar where you would service all the waitresses and stuff. And Steve and I happened to be working in that place one day, and something came up and he said, "Do you know there's something about that in the Bible?" Yeah. And I said, "Where did that come from?" You know, I said, "Okay, fair enough." You know, I wasn't interested at all. Just wasn't interested in anything he had to say on that subject. But I guess because he and I worked fairly closely together, at the time we were both studying for a master bartender certificate. And so I would go to his house and we would study about making drinks and how to make them and what goes in them and everything else. And he would sometimes come to my place. But whenever I went to his house, I remember the first time I went to his house, he would pull out a book, like a book of charts and pictures, and it was called the Pictorial Aid to Bible Study, and it just has. So
this was a guide to help you study the Bible.
Yeah, this was a guide of pictures and charts to study the Bible with, and he showed me this, and I thought, you know, I'm not interested. I'm really not. And he opened the first page, and on the first page, I noticed something stood out for me, and at that time I had no idea why. But something stood out for me. It said, "Printed at Science Publishing Company, Warburton, Victoria, Australia."
Yes. So what was so surprising about that?
Well, living in England, I mean, everything that's printed in England is probably printed there or somewhere in Europe. It's very rare. I mean, I'd never seen anything that was printed in Australia. You know, I'm on the other side of the world. I'd never visited Australia. Steve had never visited Australia. I believe that he got the book from his grandmother or something like that. But he started showing me some of the charts and pictures.
What's in it?
Just charts and pictures that illustrate some of the Bible teachings.
Okay.
So that was what its purpose was.
Yep, great.
But again, initially I just wasn't interested in its contents, but I did pick up this address.
So he showed this to you when you used to go across to study to be a better bartender.
Exactly.
And he would just bring this out.
That's right.
But Yeah, okay, keep going.
Okay, so initially I wasn't interested at all, but I guess as we worked together and we used to go out together, and we became closer friends. And so because we became closer friends, whenever I was at his place and he wanted to talk something about the Bible or God, I'd say, okay, you know, I'll give you the time of day.
Yes, okay.
And so I started to say, okay, you know, because he's a nice guy,
yes,
I'll give him the time of day.
Yes, okay.
And he then, one day, we both of us had left the bar work. Over time, we both left the bar work to do other things, but we were still friends. And I went through a relationship breakdown, and he was a very great friend at that time. So that sort of helped to cement the bond between us as friends. And I remember one day being at his place, and he was going through some Bible thing, and he was talking about Noah and the flood and the rainbow at the end of the flood. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know the Bible said anything about rainbows. I mean, I didn't know anything about the Bible at all.
So nothing at all?
Nothing at all.
Yes.
Well, I think that was on a Sunday. And the next day, Monday, I was working as a sales rep. And I was driving to work, and it was raining and the window wipers were going. And there, across the centre of the road, was the biggest, brightest rainbow I'd ever seen.
Okay.
And I started to cry.
Isn't that interesting?
And
Yes.
God spoke to my heart that day.
Absolutely.
For the first time, probably, having seen the rainbow and experienced something on the inside.
Yes.
And obviously that was what was causing me to cry.
Yes.
Probably for the first time, I absolutely knew there was a God.
Isn't that amazing?
On that day.
That's wonderful, Peter. Yeah. And so obviously, slowly but surely, you were you were being interested. I mean, did your interest grow?
Sure.
You know.
Well, after that event, I mean, I actually picked up my phone in the cab of the vehicle I was driving, and I phoned Steve. I said, "Did you see the rainbow? Did you see the rainbow?"
Yes. Okay.
And so from that moment on, I was being more interested in anything that he had to say about the Bible.
Right.
And we began looking at prophecy, for instance. I remember studying the chapter of Daniel, chapter 2, about the different nations and empires. And, and I was amazed at that. And then he began showing me other material about the Sabbath, and I was blown away by that. I just could not believe that this was something that I had not known about before, but it was very plain and so on in the Bible.
Okay. Well, that's a fascinating. I want to just find out a little bit more about Steve.
Okay.
And so we're just going to do that. We're just going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. And we're with Peter and Maree. Welcome back, and we're with Peter and Maree, and I'm sure you're enjoying this fascinating journey of faith. Peter, you were obviously pretty good at your job as a bartender. I mean, I have this picture of you enjoying life to the full, no particular needs. Were you good at your job at bartending? Did you juggle and all that sort of stuff? Or?
Yeah, I guess both Steve and I, working together as bartenders, we're in this sort of mould of the performing bartender, where we're juggling bottles and glasses and that kind of thing. There was a film some years ago that Tom Cruise made called Cocktail. And the people who trained Tom for that movie were from the same company that we worked for. So, I mean, I myself would train other bartenders to juggle and so on. And Steve and I both had a short segment on TV as well, where we would promote that actual film. During the time when it came out on video, we were asked to go and promote the film. So
it's just an amazing picture when you think about it. These two young fellas, super hot sort of bartenders juggling and in this sort of context, and suddenly there's pictorial aids mixed in here. And now let's go back to Steve. I mean, why did Steve have a pictorial aid? Who is Steve?
Well, Steve was raised in the Seventh-day Adventist home.
Okay.
I think until about the age of 13, when he sort of dropped out of church attendance. And but evidently Steve had still remembered some things about God and some things about the Bible, which he was sharing with me. I guess one important thing that I would probably bring out of that was Steve was living the same kind of lifestyle I was, just out there, and because he shared the gospel with me, shared the Bible with me, that ignited his faith.
And so his faith.
There was, I mean, it's a principle that I've carried with me from that point, is that when you share your faith, you actually grow your faith.
Okay.
And that's what was happening for Steve, because he had no intention of going back to church that week. But he, by sharing his faith with me, that really grew his faith.
Really fascinating. Okay, you've seen this rainbow, you really feel that God touched you at that point. You're starting to get interested in the study of Scripture, so what happened next? Okay,
we began, I guess we studied on a more regular basis. I mean, he was a friend for quite a while at that point, but I guess more and more the subject turned to the Bible and God and so on.
Did you find it stunning material? Did it really grab you?
With especially prophecy. I think prophecy convinced me of the authenticity of the Bible. I mean, I was growing up, I was a firm evolutionist. I firmly believed in evolution. I thought, I had a Christian friend when I was 14. I had a friend who was 12 who did go to church, and I used to give him a hard time. How can you believe all that rubbish? And so I was a firm believer in evolution, but fascinatingly enough, when I studied the prophecies, particularly in the book of Daniel, that just sort of demolished any kind of opposition that I had. And I thought, okay, well, maybe the Bible's true. Yes, and I just started to want to know what the Bible had to say. So that was prophecy, but the Sabbath too was absolutely amazing to me, because I remember learning as a schoolboy that, you know, Sunday's the first day of the week. I remember that. And I thought, yeah, Sabbath. I mean, it just made sense. And I could not believe that this was something that was not widely known.
Well, for sure. And so now you're studying the Bible and starting to go to church. Steve's coming back to church.
Sure. Well, Steve brought me a Bible for Christmas one year. And one day I remember we were studying, he says, I know the truth, I'm going to go back to church.
Okay.
And I says, okay, I'll come with you. And so Steve went back to church at Worcester Seventh-day Adventist Church in England. And his first day back at church was my first day at church. And so we went along there. It was an interesting experience because it was a very small church, a very plain church. There was probably about 20 people there. There was no musical accompaniment, so the people sang a cappella. And I remember at lunchtime, they invited us to stay for lunch, and they had a plate with these round grey things that I've since learned to nuttolene. But I said, "What's that?" You know, because it was so unusual to me. But the two things I would say of that church were the people were friendly. And they taught the Bible truth, and I was really impressed by that.
That's amazing. Such a different picture from the bar, you know, this high glitz place and this plain little church, you know, tiny little church, 20 people. But they obviously, they cared for you and loved you, and that was the beginning of your journey. Yeah,
I should say at this point, I guess, that I was intellectually stimulated by all the material that I was learning. And because of the Rainbow experience, I recognised that there was indeed a God. But I had not really committed my life to it. I mean, I would go to the church one week, and then I would go to the football match the next. I was heavily involved with my football club.
So that was your other church?
That was my other church. I would go to my one church the one week and the other church the other week. And so I was a season ticket holder, and I was not going to break the bond with my football club very easily.
And I believe sometime after this you went backpacking around the world, is that correct?
Yeah, I was really interested in travel, and I had been to Europe, and I had actually lived and worked in Cyprus as a bartender for a little time, and I'd been to the States. So when two friends said, look, we're going to go backpacking to Australia for a year.
Yes.
I said, that's something I'd like to do. And so we planned to do that, and we did. We went backpacking to Australia. We
Keep going. Sorry, did you visit Thailand on the way?
Yes,
did you share that with me?
On the way to Australia, we went to Thailand and Hong Kong, and I remember one of the things I packed in my backpack.
Yes.
And you know, if you go backpacking,
Yes,
you've got
yes.
space is precious.
Yes.
But one of the things I put in was this my big Bible that Steve had brought to me, and I can remember reading my Bible on the beach in Koh Samui, an island off Thailand, beautiful island. And my friends were there sunbathing, and I was lying there on my towel and I was reading my Bible because I was just trying to gain more and more of an understanding of this incredible book.
Yeah, fascinating. That's an interesting picture too, lying on the beach in Thailand. Yes. And so from there you came on to Australia?
From there on to Australia, landed in Perth, and probably spent 3 months in Perth.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Peter. We'll leave it right there. I'm sure you're enjoying this really interesting journey of faith of Peter and Maree. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm sure you're enjoying this amazing story of amazing grace. Peter, you have landed in Perth. You've come out to the great South Land. Tell me what happened after that.
Well, I spent about 3 months in Perth with my other friends, and then I left them behind and went to Sydney to look for work. Mm-hmm. And while in Sydney, I looked up the Seventh-day Adventist Church at Chatswood, which was close to where I was living, and started attending there. And I remember I was living in a sort of backpacker house with some other English friends. And I remember going out in the morning one day to church, and I didn't return till about 5, 6 o'clock at night. And my friend Jim at the house said, "Where have you been all day?" Yes, okay. And I said, "Well, I've been to church." "You've been to church all day?" I couldn't believe it, you know. He couldn't believe that anybody would spend all day at the church. Right. But anyway, the pastor one day had an afternoon meeting at the church, and he said, "How did you come to know about the church and God?" And so I shared with him what we've shared today. And he said to me, "Have you ever been baptised?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Would you like to be baptised?" Okay. And I thought about that for a while. I said, "Yes, I would." Right. And so we began then preparing towards baptism. Now at that time, when he asked me that question, I still had a lot of issues, and I realised that actual question, "Do you want to be baptised?" was a really focusing point for me. Serious. Because I remember I went to my knees shortly thereafter, and I prayed to God, and I said, "Lord, if you want me to become a Christian, I want to be all or nothing. I don't want to be, you know, 1 foot in the church and 1 foot in the bar, you know." So I said, "It's got to be all or nothing." And I said, "If you want me to become a Christian, find some work for me in your field." Okay, you specifically prayed that, I prayed Peter. Specifically for that. And what happened as a result of that prayer? Well, incredibly, as I was studying then with the pastor, preparing towards baptism, he said to me, he said, "You know, I've been praying that the Lord will find me a young volunteer to help me run some programs in the church." Amazing. And I said, "Well, I've been praying that the Lord will find me some work in his field." And he said, "Well, maybe the Lord's put us together." And then I thought, "Oh, I better pray again." And I'm praying, "Are you sure, Lord, this is really what you want to do?" And it was as if God said to me, "You asked, here it is, what you want to do." Wonderful. So an affirmation of the journey you were taking. Yeah. So look, I want to come now to Maree and just discover how you people met. What happened? I think it's a good story. Do you want me to tell it, or do you want me to read? Well, look, Maree, just tell us briefly. I can say that, yeah. I was doing my nursing at the time at Sydney Adventist Hospital, which is in Wahroonga in New South Wales. Yeah. And a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, a nurse, she got together with me and a few others, and we thought, right, we're going to, because of our profession being nurses, we wanted to raise some funds for homeless children. Yeah. And the Sydney City Council had their winter mission sleep out coming up on the steps
steps of the Opera House.
Right.
So Anne, my friend, said, okay, we got all our friends together, and unbeknown to me, another nursing student invited Peter along. And I remember it well, we were sitting on the bus going to the train station to go to the Opera House, and Peter was down the back of the bus, and we were introducing hi, and yeah, when we got to the Opera House, that's when the story really began. But that was our first introduction, just hi.
Okay, and your background, you were brought up in an Adventist Christian home?
Yes, I was. Yes, my parents were missionaries in Papua New Guinea, and I was born there, and then we came back here to Australia.
Good. Okay, let's hear very briefly from your perspective, Peter.
Well, preparing for baptism, got baptised, and a week after my baptism I began working as a volunteer for the Greater Sydney Conference. And then the interesting part about that too was that the pastor gave me a pictorial aid of my own at the time.
Oh, okay.
He said, I want you to read this, learn it and use it. And I said, hey, this is amazing, I've got one of my own now.
Isn't that amazing?
But shortly thereafter I went to a friend's wedding. I came back from that wedding, and I was a long way from home. I'd been away from home for about 9 months at that time, and I guess I was feeling kind of lonely. And I remember going to my knees and saying, probably a couple of days after that wedding trip, I said to the Lord, I said, Lord, I need you to find me a wife. And the idea was that I knew I wasn't going to be very good at finding my own.
Yes, okay.
So I wanted God to find me a wife.
Right.
And I met Maree at the Sydney Opera House 3 days later.
Isn't that amazing?
After praying that prayer.
And there was some chemistry pretty soon. It was pretty obvious that you were meant for each other.
Let Maree tell you.
Well, no, not really.
Okay, right, just briefly.
I thought he was a bit forward, but it wasn't until a month later that we got together. So, well, we actually went out. So, yeah. It was gradually, slowly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and so, Peter, then you went to work in a publishing house, is that correct?
Yeah, over time, eventually I went back to England for 9 months because my visa expired, and Maree came over and visited me there. Then we came, then in the process we got engaged. I came back, we got married, and over the process of time we went to live in the Yarra Valley in Victoria in Australia, and there's a town there at Warburton. And it came to pass that I began working at the Signs Publishing Company, the very place where this pictorial aid was printed, and the one that Steve used to share with me, that was where it was printed. And I thought, this is amazing, I'm going to actually work at the place where this thing was printed. Well, the first day I began working there, we were working on the pictorial aid. For Bible study.
That's
so there was like a shiver went down my spine when I saw it, because I thought, here I am working to produce materials that are going to go around the world, and it was one of those such materials that actually helped to influence me of the truthfulness of the Bible.
Fantastic. And of course, you know, the final bit of the story is that you felt convicted to go and study for ministry within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And you graduated from that degree, and you're currently a Seventh-day Adventist pastor. So from bartender in the UK to Seventh-day Adventist pastor, it's a wonderful story. We haven't got very long left, but you have a passion for outreach, probably because of your background, Peter.
Absolutely. I think my passion is that people at least know what God is offering, because God is offering something incredible, something you're not going to find anywhere else. And there are so many people that don't even know it's available. I didn't know it was available. But when I found it, it transformed my life. I mean, if you'd have told me 15 years ago that you're going to be a pastor in a church, I would say, absolutely no way. But it's amazing what God can do, and He can take you from one side of the world to the other if He needs to get you where He wants you to be.
And I see a very happy couple here, and it's been a real privilege to talk to you and hear this wonderful story of God's grace. I'm sure you've enjoyed this story, this amazing story of amazing grace, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.